Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. We're a week into the Barrens meta. Both of us have been playing a lot of Arena. This is a good chance for us to get together, talk about our experiences, and just talk Arena, period. Because we haven't had a lot to discuss in the previous couple of months, but we sure do have a lot to discuss today.
Yep, yep. Barrens is here. New core set is here, and everything's different. The whole game feels like a whole new freaking game. Um, I think the best way that I would describe it is you're guaranteed to get your curve almost no matter how you draft, but every game is a late game unless it's not, and then you die immediately. So
Okay.
that's my description of where the meta is right now. And it's driven really by demon hunters being, what is it now? Is it 57%, 56%? Some very high win rate is where demon hunters are at, and no one else is really touching
It's
that.
56% as of Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That's where Demon Hunters are right now.
Yeah.
But no one is even close. It's not like a
Mhm.
gradual degradation like it typically is in healthier metas. Right now, Demon Hunter is at 56%. Priest is at number 2 with 51.7%. So there is a more than 4% gap, which is definitely not anything you want to see from a meta.
Yeah, so this is the no micro adjust yet. And so we assume they're going to do it soon, but you never know. We'll talk about the communications from Blizzard that's come since then, but hopefully they push the button soon because clearly Demon Hunters are out of control, and Demon Hunters are out of control because the offering odds have been like reset. I think given the new core set, they're like it's not the initiate set anymore. I'm sure all their offering odds are like kind of out of whack, or maybe it's just a total reset. But you're getting all the ridiculous Demon Hunter cards now. They took a lot of them out of the game, but the ones that remain, you're seeing everywhere. I'm talking expendable performers all the time. Cycle of Hatred, quite common. And this new card in core set, the Ildari Inquisitor, that is a 8 mana 8/8 rush where whenever you attack something, it'll hit it again.
Yeah.
So that means on turn 9, you get to get an 8/8 rush, you get to deal 1 damage to something, and this hits that target again. Or, much more common, you use your hero power to hit face, and you deal 9 damage to your opponent's face after clearing a taunt.
That's
So,
definitely by far the most common. Also, I don't know if you saw this interaction, but the Illidari Inquisitor also hits, the second hit where he just follows your lead.
mhm.
He can do that even while frozen, which
Yeah.
is pretty hilarious.
Yep, I had a double Ildari Inquisitor deck the other night. Went 12 wins, not without a lot of difficulty, because the meta is kind of rough right now in terms of just the RNG and the ability to do ridiculous kind of swings on all your resource types. Like there was one game where I was literally up by like I don't know a card. He had like 3 cards left. I had like 4 cards left. It's like turn 12, and then he had 13 cards the next turn. Um,
Yes.
that was card advantage. And board swings, obviously we've all seen the most ridiculous board swings. I'm not even going to talk about that. Health swings, like just everything. It's just so swingy. Um,
Yeah. Demon Hunters, if you remember, for the longest time, they had cards, but they effectively didn't have a lot of the good cards. They were adjusted so heavily such that they might as well not have existed. The only way, the more realistic way you were getting them was not through the draft, but through discovery. And now you can, number one, draft them. And number two, you could still discover them. So if we're talking about Cycle of Hatred, expendable performers, and you're facing a Demon Hunter, well, that Scorpid that comes out in turn 3 that discovers the spell, it's got a decent shot at discovering one of those.
the 2 mana 2/2 that discovers a demon will now quite frequently find you the Eldari Inquisitor.
The
And
pool is smaller now.
yeah,
Yeah.
you have a Discover Outcast card, the Eldari Studies. that gets you that legendary, the 4 mana 3/4 multi shot and a 3/4 body. If outcasts like legendary quite frequently, it gets you other ridiculous outcast cards. Yeah, I mean, Demon Hunters, when the pool's good, all the discovers get really, really ridiculously good. And one of the things that they did, and this is something that we were picking up on in our card preview, is that they got rid of a lot of the bad cards. So all the discover cards have gotten better. And that's one of the reasons why Scorpion's so good. It's one of the reasons why we rated South Sea so high. Like whenever you're trying to discover things, yeah, like you're going to get something good. So yeah, do we want to talk about Demon Hunters first, and then talk about Watchtower after?
Sure. We can talk about Demon Hunter because I think if you want to talk about how you play against Demon Hunter, a lot of there's just a big overlap in the Venn diagram of how to succeed in the meta because Demon Hunters are the meta, but also generally the tips that are applicable to Demon Hunter are going to be quite applicable throughout other classes as well. Like ADWCTA said, we are in a meta that is filled with number one swings, but number two, the almost complete inability for you to carefully measure, get these incremental card advantage sort of gains and say, okay, I'm up by 5 cards. I should be pretty good. So in 2018, that held true. Something crazy had to have happened for you to lose a game in which you have enough HP and you have like a 5-card advantage. You locked it.
I think in 2014, having a 1 card advantage was pretty good. In 2015, in 2016, having a 2-card advantage was pretty good. By 2018, you wanted a 3-card advantage, and today, no card advantage feels safe.
No card advantage is safe, partly because you're going to see a lot of drafted legendaries. So I've drafted quite a few decks. You're able to draft quite a few legendaries.
Yeah, they definitely up the rate.
And the new dragons, whether it is Onyxia, but most importantly, Ysera, which, if you're just going by win rates, is just all time one of the most broken cards ever. Ysera now gives all of the dream cards to you at once, and they're all busted cards. Laughing Sister is the worst card, and it's just a severely overstated minion that is very cheap. So you literally get everything. Ysera, as long as you have the breathing room, you play her, and that 5-card advantage that I was talking about, suddenly you're significantly outclassed because they have a giant AoE, big minions, a very tempo efficient removal. So they really do have everything. They have further reach with Nightmare as well. That's just one example of a card. And then there's, sort of combos and discover chains, all of that stuff. So if you want to win in this meta, you really do have to snowball early, build upon that advantage. And when in doubt, you got to go face.
I'm going to go with the complete opposite analysis, but go ahead with this.
You got to go face.
No. You can, finish your analysis first. I'm going to come in and say pretty much the exact opposite.
So, where I have found success is that you don't have to go aggressive, but what happened when the core set came in and, we have the card pool that we have now, there's a lot of power, but there is a bit more predictability as well in terms of it's not like 100 things that can happen. It's like, maybe 20 things that can happen on any given turn. A lot of it is very powerful and a lot of it can screw you over, but you're able to think of those things. And so when you're doing the calculations for like, oh, should I trade? Should I go face? It's a little bit easier for you now to be like, okay, well, can I take this punish? Can I take that punish? In your sort of calculations of being able to go face. And I found that the decks where I've had like the most success are decks that are not necessarily aggro, but do have some reach, some ways for me to finish the game, ways for me to really cheat out tempo, or at least put out like very good tempo in the early game, and then just being able to follow that up. And there were quite a few games in, for example, my 12-win mage in which I went face and I was like, okay, even if you clear me with some premium removals, I've at least dealt enough damage to you such that I, number one, invalidate some of the cards, even some of the pretty premium cards you might have. And number two, I can rely on, that ruined orb finding me that last bit of damage. Just like, oh, I still have Scorpid to draw into, and I can find the damage there. That's a little bit of damage. So that's what I found to have the most success. Meanwhile, in games in which I've been sitting there, feeling confident, uh, I do win a decent amount of those, just not as much as I would like to win. And as we've always said, if you're an infinite player, you just like that one loss is so bad for your record. Like you can't take that one loss. So any way that I can be a little bit more in control, that I can just end the game a little bit faster before who the hell knows what is in their deck, because deck quality can be very insane these days. The better it is for me. So I found that shifting the times in which I go face, shifting that calculation a little bit, has been very advantageous.
So the thing that I'm going to completely agree with you on here is that you should go face more. Like, you should definitely go face more because of everything you've said. If you can put your opponent into a spot where you do a swing and you're immediately threatening lethal or maybe threatening lethal with the reach that you put into your deck, that's very powerful. Because swings are huge now. So if you guys are just fighting for the board and you're kind of equal and you do a big swing, well, you're going to put 12, 15 damage of pressure on your opponent, sometimes 20. I've dealt 24 damage to my opponents in one turn. So you need that initial burst of going face rather than trying to protect your board, and you also have more tools to do that. Where I disagree is how to build your deck. I've had much more success building my deck for the late game than for the... And by the way, all of this I'm talking about non-Demon Hunter and non-Hunter. For Hunters,
Yeah.
you should obviously go faster. And for Demon Hunters, you're just playing a different game. I don't think it matters how you build a Demon Hunter right now. It's just they're good in the late game. They're good in the early game. They're just kind of dominant. But if you're playing another class and you're trying to go fast and you face a Demon Hunter, it's going to be rough because they're going to control the board on you so hard that if you build your deck in a way that relies on snowballing, you're not going to be able to snowball. And you're going to be cut short very, very consistently by any Demon Hunter you face. And a lot of the decks that survive those same Demon Hunters, about half of which are aggro, and they'll be able to really take care of you because you'll be outputting less than the Demon Hunter. So I think you have a lower stability going in that route with deck construction. Instead, because it's pretty much impossible to not get a curve these days, so you can focus all of your resources on removals. And if this is the game where if something sticks on the board for one turn, you are in a super terrible position, like a thing that you don't want sticking on the board. So you need your initiative, you need your removals. And you, most importantly, need big cards or cards that draw other cards, like big card advantage cards, because you need this game to continue to drag on until you have that opportunity to do a swing and push for lethal. You're not going to win on card advantage. I feel like that happens very, very rarely, where both parties are top decking and then you win. Even in a slow deck that goes 12 wins, you've maybe won 3 or 4 of your games that way. Most of the time, you're going to win by having 6 cards in your hand, 8 cards in your hand, and your opponent has no more health, and that's totally fine. Normally, in normal metas, my biggest piece of advice for being efficient is if you still have cards in your hand and you lost, then you're going too slow. And if you run out of cards and then you lose, then you're not pushing fast enough. That doesn't apply anymore because it's entirely a swing meta. So now what you do is you always push whenever you can. So you have a curve, your opponent has a curve. That's just what happens. No one's missing 2 drops, 3 drops. I mean, sometimes people don't like taking 2 drops. So I've faced some decks missing 2 drops, so I think it's generally a mistake. Normally, you're not missing 2 drops, you're not missing 3 drops, you're not missing 4 drops, you're not missing 5 drops. You're probably not missing 6 drops either sometimes, but then you get to fill in the gaps. And your opponent's doing the same thing. And so you have some chance of being on the board and a decent chance of not being on the board by the end of your curve turns. And so you need a deck to be able to deal with both scenarios very, very well, because no matter how much you reinforce your aggro, you can get taken off the board like by turn 5, like super, super frequently, because the swings are just that ridiculous, and they're not like turn 7 swings necessarily. They're like turn 5 swings, a lot of them. Now, because even if you go slow, because you have a curve, because your opponent can like potentially not draw into a curve, and all this other stuff that's like randomness and whatever, you still have a very good chance of actually getting the board. And because most of your opponents, including Demon Hunters for whatever reason, like half of Demon Hunters are also playing this like kind of whatever-y like curve game where they're not like, you know, super, super like aggroing out onto the board, you'll just get the board anyway. You know, and then you'll push face anyway, and then you're just in a much better position to respond than if you were like going aggro. So that's my experience. I've had a lot more success with discover by decks, with card draw based decks. You need your curve. You definitely need your curve, but you do much better if you wait for your curve and you pick value, and then your curve will fill it. It always does, because curves are being offered like everywhere now.
So you got 12 wins with Demon Hunter, right?
Yeah, but that was just a ridiculous deck.
Right. What's your record with like the other classes?
But like with bad decks, I'm taking bad decks to like 7 wins. Like actually like just low quality decks where most people vote against 7 wins.
Because I'm just curious, because I haven't seen consistency, whether it's from my experience or from like the streams. It's mostly Dreads that I watch from like the non kind of, I would say, aggressively mid range. You know, like where you're actually trying to like tempo out. If you can get like good discovers off from like, you know, a Scorpid or something and consider that a bonus, that's great. But if you're like a non-Demon Hunter class and you're playing, you know, that sort of, I'll call it like the Mage Scribe playstyle, right? That Mage Scribe playstyle. Mm-hmm. I don't see success in that, consistent success.
I think you have to like wonder what is success, right? Is success average, or is success like potential to go 12? And I think it's a good mix of both, because you're at the point in the meta where you can get pretty consistently 7 wins with bad decks, at least 5 wins with bad decks, 7 wins with like still pretty bad decks for this meta by going slow. And a lot of it is due to opponents' misplays, but opponents are misplaying a lot because games are more complicated when you go slow. So if I'm regularly taking like terrible decks to somewhere between 5 and 7 wins, I feel very confident about that strategy. Because when you get a good deck, it's going to go for higher, right? Because when you build a deck, you're looking to limit the downside. And if you're looking to get the upside, a slower deck is going to have more upside than a faster deck when you're constructing it, because the faster deck is less draft dependent. Like, I think you have to go more with the draft and to have the potential of the upside, because the downside of a missed kind of like draft when you try to go slow, which used to be, oh, I don't get my curve, or oh, I don't get value, is now just, oh, I don't get enough value. And you can actually outvalue a lot of your opponents by just being a better player, because people are terrible at like playing into the late game. At least people in the early win stages, like up to like, 4 wins. So even with a terrible, like an objectively terrible deck, facing decks that are objectively better, you just see people misplay, and that'll get you to places that you really like don't belong with the deck. And maybe that'll change as the meta goes, but in the last few days, it's been working. I don't have experience with good decks. I have not had a deck yet where I'm like, oh, this is a above average deck. No, I've had one that got sniped and then got hugely unlucky and then got sniped again. But besides that one,
never lucky, man.
No, never I mean, lucky. Like, it was like literally like RNG roll unlucky, or it's just like, oh, if he has this exact card as the top deck because I already have a read that he doesn't have it, he'll win. Otherwise, I'm gonna win, and then he top decks that exact card. that you don't know that he even has in his deck, although he probably does.
So
But yeah, but I think it's about damage mitigation in especially in an unstable meta like this. Like you want to make sure that you're doing okay with bad decks, and then let the good decks carry you.
with Demon Hunters, you always want to watch out if you're hand tracking. They have had a spell off of a Scorpid that they haven't played for a while. On turn 7, we've gotten to the point where you kind of like Cycle of Hatred, expendable performers should be on your mind. I'm not saying you're always going to have a way to play around it. You should at least think about it now. Whereas before, that should have never been the case because they were adjusted out of the game, such that if you're facing one of the lucky few individuals out of like 100 decks who got it, you say, all right, great. This is basically like them discovering a runaway Blackwing, for example, and playing it perfectly against me. Nothing I could do there. Now, it has to at least enter your mind. Coilfang has to enter your mind going into turn 8. Once again, I'm not saying it's like, oh man, you definitely have to play around it, and you're always going to have a way around it. But everything is back on the table for Demon Hunters. Meanwhile, previously, it was just their crappy normal cards that were basically just like every other class's decent cards, and you didn't have these world beaters.
Yeah, I don't think you have to play around any of them. Maybe Cycle of Hatred, but I've literally seen Coilfang twice, Cycle of Hatred once out of all the Demon Hunters I played against. I've seen Illidari Inquisitor like 5 times, and they usually end the game against me. But
you see all the cards pretty often. I think you've been lucky, I guess, to not see the others a decent amount.
Yeah,
but
and there's no way to play around performers.
To see the Inquisitor a little bit, like
okay, maybe, but Coilfang's like super hard to play around. Like I would almost never play around Coilfang. I'd play around Cycle of Hatred sometimes, only because it's easy to play around. You know how much damage it's doing, and it's impossible to play around performers. So
the one way to actually play around Coilfang is
not having high attack minions.
Yeah. Like spreading out, not having a single high attack minion so they can't get the taunt immediately, so that if they play it and they're pretty close to dying, I don't have to deal with the taunt, right? Like they can kill something that's like, they can kill my 4/6, but then I still have like another 7 attack that I can push to their face, and with the like little amount of damage I have in my hand, they're dead, right?
So yeah, but unless you have that as a guarantee, I don't think that's worth it to play around versus just having more damage out on the board. Right, like it's a fringe case.
I agree. I'm not like, it's one of those things where like, okay, well, if I had a slightly better play in a vacuum, but it would actually just like lose to Coilfang, right? Or not lose, it would like stabilize him for at least one more turn.
Right.
Meanwhile, if like, do I even acknowledge Coilfang like before? No, right?
Okay.
I literally don't acknowledge it because the other one is like a few percentage points stronger against the field, and now it's like, oh yeah, like Coilfang is in 20% of all decks, so of course. And then it's going to turn 8, so they've had a decent shot at drawing it.
But you want to I want to emphasize that you're playing around Coilfang what percentage of times when you are on the board and pushing, which is the only time that it kind of matters that you could possibly like quote unquote play around Coilfang. You're doing it like less than 10%, probably less than 5% of the time. Like actively, not thinking about it, but actively making a move that you wouldn't have made if you weren't thinking about it.
So,
like,
what's the scenario again?
The scenario is if you are facing a Demon Hunter, what percent of times now do you make a different play because you're thinking about Coilfang? Like once you get to the late game.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it's super high, but before it was like actually 0, because it didn't exist, right?
Yes, before it's actually 0, but now
existing and not existing. Yes. Like it exists now.
Yes, but I'm saying if you don't think about it, you're still like because you're at most changing your play 5% of the time because of Coilfang, because most of the time you don't have the ability to change your play, and then a huge portion of the other times you don't, like you're losing too much, to change your play. So it's still I just want to emphasize that it is existent in the game now, whereas before you literally never worried about it. But it's like a very small like consideration in that it actually changes your play. Like think about it, sure, but if it's changing your play, like if you're just sitting there playing around Coilfang half the time, even a quarter of the time, you are super hurting yourself.
Sure. Didn't I say that? Didn't I say that at the very beginning of my thing?
I want to put it more forcefully and put numbers behind it. Like I think it's below 5%, but definitely
Okay.
like I think without any argument below 20%.
Sure. So that's Demon Hunters right now, and a lot of people are not having fun with it. That's one of those things that um, you can talk about numbers, you can talk about power levels. At the end of the day, Arena is not the most popular mode. We're really in need of players. And the one thing that we really don't want to happen is for people to leave because it's not as fun. And fun is always this nebulous, kind of hard to define kind of thing. But I will say, just from reactions on Reddit, a lot of people don't find Demon Hunter fun, and a lot of people don't find Watchtowers fun as well, which is our second topic. But um, we can talk about that, and we can kind of talk about what makes something unfun, because something I've read a lot about as well is people are just like, well, you can't define fun. No, you can. You absolutely can define fun, because uh, you can say that, oh, everyone's opinion of fun is different. It's really not. Like, except for ADWCTA, who's like
I
really
was about to
weird.
say I totally disagree with this. I think
No, no,
fun
no.
is in
Except
the
for
eye of the
ADWCTA,
beholder.
really 99.999% of people have principles, like very basic fundamental principles that make up fun. And it's different to like exactly what you prioritize. If we're making a pie chart, whether it's 40% or 30%, but there's a lot of similarities there. We can talk about the watch post for a second. As you know, if you saw a preview video, we had a big outcry about Morshan watch post. Less of an outcry about far watch post, but we did also talk about the power level. The 4-drop watch post is a joke. It's just I literally laugh when that's played. But the 2-drop and 3-drop watch posts have been very effective, and Morshan watch post has been an absolute terror in the arena. There's really just no two ways around it. Whether you have played it and seen the complete suffocation of your opponent, whether you have just been dominated by watch post and how it made you feel, to the actual statistics that you can look at right now, where Morshan watch post is by far the highest win rate, like deck win rate, neutral common card, like Ysera is like very high and whatever, but we're not talking about legendaries here. Last I checked, it was like 2 to 3 percentage points higher than the second highest, which was Imprisoned Vile Fiend, which, surprise, surprise, is quite good against the watch post. And the Mulligan win rate was insane, historically high. I think it was 67%. So it means if you got it in the Mulligan, if you managed to get it at the start of the game, you just win a lot. And there's not much that can be done about it. So yes, Morshan watch post, it basically has lived up to its billing, and it's just an absolute terror.
Yeah. We said S tier. It's S tier. Other cards are not that close. But what's good about the watch post, the Morshan watch post, in terms of the meta, is that it's not dominating the meta. And it's not dominating the meta because it's not seen in the meta. It's seen in about 1 in every 6 decks. And that's probably because it's not offered all that often. I was offered Morshan watch post twice in my... How many runs have I done? Like 8? I think I did 8 runs. And I was offered it twice. I obviously took both of them, but you have to consider some people get offered the card and don't take it because they don't know that it's good. It's kind of a weird card. And you just end up in a meta without that many watch posts. And that's great, because watch posts are terrifying when they come down, and they totally change the entire game, and they are terrible. That being said, I've beaten more watch posts than I've been beaten by. Although every time I play a watch post, I seem to just win the game. like usually just off the watch post, either because my opponents can't deal with it or because my opponents try really, really hard to not play into it, that they just end up losing the board and everything on it, and then, like snowballing to whatever. Um, Small sample size, but I feel like there are ways to kind of draft and play in a way that you are going to do better against a watch post. Not that you're ever going to do great against a watch post, right? Like your ideal scenario when a watch post comes down is to take care of the watch post and everything the watch post may or may not summon using 2 cards and 2 more mana. So that is like the equivalent of your opponent getting like a free innervate, like an old innervate, like just free. Now, that's powerful, but that's not game ending, right? Like especially in this swing meta, spotting your opponent an innervate, like a free innervate, is definitely not game ending anymore. In a way that it obviously would have been in classic, and was in some of the prior metas as well. So I don't want to it's that powerful. The win rates don't lie, but also the win rates are for the average HS replay player, but more importantly, the win rates are for the average player that the HS replay player data set faces, because it's a card that your opponent has to react to much more than you have to figure out when to play it. Like generally, I think like 90% plus of the time, you just play it as soon as you get it, as soon as you can get it, and you can put it on the board, and it doesn't immediately die to whatever's on the board, and known in your opponent's hand. So it's not like the most difficult to play card, but there's quite a lot of stuff that you may be able to do trying to play around it once it comes out, or even how to set it up before it comes out. So I think those stats are probably a little inflated. It's still an S tier card, maybe A plus tier card, like we were saying in the pre-release, but definitely a card that is not just super powerful, but also is, like Merps said, not fun. No one defines fun that way. And Blizzard has a pretty consistent definition of fun. I don't think they're like spotty about what they consider fun or not fun. I think, even if you disagree with it, they have a pretty consistent philosophy that they go by, and it may shift year to year, but overall, it maintains some consistency, like within a year, right? Like we know what their current iteration of not fun is, more or less, and this card definitely fits it. So I don't think it's a matter of whether Blizzard's going to remove this from the arena, but more like, or if not remove, then reduce its offering rate to the point that it might as well be removed, right? Like we've seen that happen with like SAP, for example. But it's going to be gone from the arena effectively, one way or the other, sooner or later.
I definitely believe so. There was a tweet recently by Ixar, who's been answering quite a few questions on Twitter recently. They said they will look into it, so it is something that is on the radar, whatever that means. I also do anticipate something being done about the watch post, because this really does violate a lot of the principles of fun. So let's just talk about fun for a second. If we're saying Demon Hunter is unfun, and watch post is unfun, I don't like seeing comments which are just like, well, that's just your opinion, man, because it really isn't. So if you think back to the very, very beginnings, and something that was kind of interesting, and some of you guys might know this, for others, this will be trivia. Blizzard has always cared about how people feel. So if we're talking about psychology, we're talking about that, just the inner workings of how people process things. Fun has been very important to them. They experimented with a card that turned your screen upside down. They experimented with a card that if you if you hovered over it, it dealt 1 damage to your hero. They tried all of these like kooky things. They tried Thought Steal, actually taking cards from the opponent's deck, like stealing them,
as
right?
It should.
As it should, because it's Thought Steal. And they were like, no, that's not cool. But the Thought Steal thing is one of the most interesting, because Blizzard has an understanding of, at least a basic understanding of this psychology, and they've done studies about it where, for example, if you never had something, it's much better than you getting that thing and having it taken away. So much better, even though logically you should think, well, it doesn't really matter whether I had it or I got it, wasn't able to use it, and then have it taken away. Human beings feel so much worse about having something literally taken away from it's this like taking away effect, right? But anyways, a lot of this trivia, like it basically just shows that Blizzard cares about the philosophy and cares about how people feel. Now, going into another thing that has really defined a lot of the early game bans, and it's this feeling of lack of control. Control makes people feel really good. You want to at least have a sense of control. You never want complete control because then you get into chess and then people have to kind of face the fact that they really suck. So, and you never want that, right? You always want to hide the fact that people suck at things. That's what effective games do, right? You can blame your teammates or whatever. But control is very, very important. And when you talk about something that's unfun, it's really the player feeling like their control has been diminished significantly. Whether that is actually true or not, right? Whether that's actually true. So, in a true sense, that is more Sean Watchpost, where a lot of what they have done seems to be invalidated. And they're like, well, I couldn't really do much because Arena is, number one, limited in control in the first place. And then they're like, well, I can't do anything. Like, this just makes me lose to other things that make them seem like they didn't have control, but really they did. And that's like the Death Knights that were eventually banned, and people were like, there was nothing I could do. They dropped Death Knight on 9. It's like, oh, you probably could have done a lot of things before turn 9. And if you guys remember, that was one of those things where we're like, it's fine, didn't have to be banned. We weren't calling for it to be banned. It eventually got banned, which we were like, okay, fine, whatever. It's not like we're gonna miss the Death Knights. But just two examples of cards in which Blizzard really took the pulse of the crowd and was like, okay, both of these made people feel like they didn't have control over the game, whether it was Death Knights and they're like, oh, I just lose when it's dropped, which is totally not true, to Morshan Watch Post, in which it is a lot more true. They get it in the mulligan, and you see it from the stats. It just wins people the game, because even if you draft, quote, perfectly, and you mulligan, quote, perfectly, there's a pretty high chance you don't have anything to deal with it. And even if you eventually kill it, you've given them tons of 2/2s such that they just snowball and win the game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't have much to add to that. I think it's... okay. I will say that there's about from just looking at Arena HS and just generally, I think there's about a 15% of people who I see saying things. They're not the top players necessarily, but who think that Watch Post is fun. And so I don't think Watch Post is universally thought of as not fun. I think if you think more about it, and also if you like wait a month and force these people to play like one arena a day in a month, they'll be like, all right, Watch Post needs to go. But there are people who definitely think that it's an interesting mechanic, and that, you know, it should be in the game. But those people are wrong.
Yeah.
They just haven't come to the correct conclusion yet, and they will. It's not like they're going to stay wrong. They just haven't gotten the experience, which will change their mind yet. And unlike some people, that's why we do card previews and we're able to predict all this stuff beforehand. I like to say, I don't need any experience to know whether something is good or bad or how it affects the game. As long as you're just incrementally adding to an existing like mathematical structure, I have a pretty good sense of what's going into it. And that's not something that most people can do, and that's okay. But the impact will be felt if you get enough experience in it, and that's the fun that almost everybody is going to agree with, and that's where Watch Post is more on Watch Post is falling quite short in.
Yeah. And specifically, it's just the 3/5 that is actually problematic. The 2/4 is a good card, but it's not actually problematic, and the 4/6 is an absolute joke. So nobody cares about that.
I love the 2/4. Like I
Yeah, I
absolutely
did too.
freaking love that card and the
Mhm.
design and the power level. It's like messing with things on a different level, right? Like it's powerful, but it's not anywhere near I mean, yeah, it's not near the most powerful neutral cards. It's just a regular like low premium to like normal premium depending on your deck kind of two drop. Uh and I like that design. But the Morshan Watch Post, not for the arena. Constructed, probably okay. I have no idea. I know that it is being used in constructed, which is scary. When a neutral card is, whenever a neutral card is being used in constructed, I'm like, oh god, this better be like a very specific counter a particular deck kind of card, or else it's gonna be terrible in arena. Um, but yeah, I don't know if it's going to get nerfed or not. It's probably not used that widely in constructed to actually be nerfed. So some action has to be taken on the arena side. I mean, it did take them like how long did it take them to get rid of Vicious Fledgling?
It took a while, and it also took a while for mind control tech as well.
Well, it took like 3 years for Mind Control Tech to get removed from arena. But the idea is they have a faster response time now, right? Like with Runaway Blackwing, when it was banned before it even hit arena, we were so happy. Like that one was, I guess, more obvious because it was less complicated, whereas more Sham Watch Post is very complicated. But it's still like that's the thing, right? Like Blizzard's going to use stats to determine whether to remove a card or not, which is fine. But then you have to trust your own stats. Like you can't make excuses for cards just because you like them or because you think it's interesting or whatever. Like if you're gonna go with stats, go with stats, and stats are gonna say ban this card. Just like stats are gonna say ban a whole bunch of legendaries in arena. Actually, like Ysera needs to be banned in arena. So if Blizzard really does want to go by stats, I am fully in favor of it because it'll lead to a lot of card bannings. The
Yeah,
cards that are bad in arena, they will
I
like.
don't think people would complain to. I mean, some Timmies out there would obviously want to play with Ysera, right? Like they want that
Mhm.
fun of it. But if you take arena even somewhat seriously, I don't think anyone would seriously miss Ysera being out, because that is one of the boogeyman that is lurking in every single game, where you're ahead a little bit, but you haven't been able to put on pressure, and you just had to take these trades. And you're just thinking, okay, well, Ysera effectively ends the game at any given point, even though I've made
Even though I'm really
good
ahead.
decisions. Yeah, even though I'm really ahead, I've made good decisions, I made good plays, but something like a Ysera, and even sort of some of the worse dragons like a Nixia, can end the game, or at least erase all of the good I have done before the game,
Yeah.
or something like Deathwing as well,
Yeah,
right?
and the worst part is that they're thoughtless to play, have no RNG, and are just like if you have it in your deck, or especially if you have it in your hand, you're just going to like do really 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 well in the game, like and not in a way that any amount of good play beforehand could really make up for on a consistent basis. Like there'll be times in which you're beat before you get it dropped, or it doesn't do enough once it gets dropped. But that's a very minority percent of chance in arena. Like those are not arena cards. Those are constructed cards, and they don't belong in the arena. But hey, um, there's only so much that we can ask for. Morshan Watch Post is seen way more often than legendaries, so we can start there. But yeah, like I don't know. Like if you're going to say we're going to look at stats to determine if a card should be removed from arena, and then you don't remove Ysera, what stats are you looking at? The stat of your internal analysis of fun? That's not a stat. That's not data.
I mean, at the end of the day, there is a very human component to um, kind of deciding. Like they've always done it that way,
Yeah,
right? They've
yeah,
never
they've
just
always done it. But I
banned.
mean, Ixar's
Yeah, they've
like, we
always
need to
done
look at the stats to determine that. I'm like, okay, well, now you want to look at the stats and drag this out? whereas
Right.
whereas on many
It's never
things,
been purely about the
yeah,
stats.
when many things you don't look at the stats, right? Like maybe for Runaway Blackwing they looked at their internal stats, but then I don't know what the internal Blizzard team that played some of the arena, I guess, with Watchpost was doing, with Morsham Watchpost was doing, because that couldn't have looked good either. Like we see it out right now. Like, oh, and who knows, right? Maybe Runaway Blackwing stats were so ridiculous, right? Maybe it was like, I don't know what the win rate right now of Watchpost is, but maybe it was like 5% more win rate than what even is right now Watchpost, which is the highest win rate neutral non-legendary in the arena. Maybe it was like that big of a difference, so that's why they nixed it immediately. But yeah, I mean, they have to draw a line somewhere. You guys know where I like to draw the line. They don't have to draw it there, but if they're going by stats, that's a line, right? Like, if you're going by numbers, then you have something objective, and you can feel very good about it. If people are like, what? Why is this bad? Be like, quite simple. It's winning too much, and we don't nerf cards just for arena.
Yeah. I think at this point it's good to address a certain principle which I feel like always comes up every single time we do a review. I talk about this in some capacity, and then it gets forgotten because it's not typically tied to something like watch posts that everyone's asking to be banned or whatnot. And let's just use. I was thinking about how I could effectively explain this. We're going to use Merps units, okay? This hypothetical Merps units. Invest now, okay? Merps coin to the moon. Okay.
NFT.
Yeah, exactly. I'm launching it right now. Actually, you guys are getting at the ground level. So Merps units are going to be this kind of amorphous unit that measures like this advantage that you get in the game. Now, that's all I'm going to define it as, because whether it's face damage, whether that's ability to advantageously trade or get value or something, one Merps unit is this unit, and I'm only going to compare it to other Merps units. So we don't have to like equate it to like, oh, what is it in stats? No. I'm just going to, compare it to other Merps units. So people have this idea that, and it's also why when we rate something on low card pretty high, that's sort of step one on people being a little bit uncomfortable, rating 2 drops and 3 drops as like kind of S tier, or like something that's not a Scorpid, right? That can discover something big. So they internalize and they're like, oh, no, that's actually big. So big, okay, big S tier,
Yeah, I mean,
big, real
Scorpid is a
good.
big card, right? It's a
It is a
card
big
plus
card. It's a huge
a
card.
Cobra, yeah.
Right. So let's go through a couple of fundamental things that are not arguable, like we just all accept, right? Um, big cards will have more Merps units when played.
Mm-hmm.
That is just a fact.
They're
So
paying for it
you're
because
paying
they
for it.
cost more mana and
Mhm.
because there's a larger percent of times in which they are unplayable, namely until you get that many mana. So anytime
Yeah.
they're in your hand before that, they are literally unplayable. You lose an option, and you cannot be good at this game without having options.
So here's the thing about, let's say, Proto Drake, right? It's a card that we all know, and we all know its possibilities, the pressure it puts. Proto Drake outputs 10 Merps units, whether that is, like the
Mm-hmm.
ability to just go face the next turn or whatever. It outputs 10 Merps units. Now, you paid for those Merps units. And what did you exactly pay? You paid not only the mana, but you paid for the complete inability to play it before turn 8, right? I'm not talking about like ways to cheat it out and all of crazy stuff, but you're paying for that complete inability. That's a price. That's actually a pretty heavy price, right? Um, so if we are talking about a lower card, and we can include Watch Post here, we can include the caravans as well, because this principle goes along with the caravans as well. Um, some people have this idea. It's like, well, okay, so the impact isn't as big, right? As when I slam down the Proto Drake on 8 and get 10 Merps units. First of all, with Watch Post, you can argue that the Merps units are off the charts, right? This is like Chernobyl levels, like you can't even read it. But with 2 and 3 drops, there should always be a pretty low cap. And I mean actual drops. I don't mean like 2 mana things that maybe have a body to them but are actually like spells, Like don't those aren't counted in those. There has to be a cap such that when you drop it, it can never and should never have the impact of 10 Merps units like a Proto Drake. Otherwise, you are breaking the game. Otherwise, you have actually just broken the game. And just like how you are paying the cost for those Merps units in the early game by the complete inability to play it. So remember, you couldn't play it at all before. Let's remember that. You couldn't play it. So that was like just something you couldn't even touch. People for these 2 and 3 drops are saying, well, in the late game, it's not as good. Yeah, sure. They're not as good. You don't get as many Merps units. So you're only getting like a 2 Merps units or 3 Merps units when you play it. You know what you got from that Proto Drake? You got 0. You got a big fat 0, and it's taking up a slot. Nothing. So there is no way that 2 and 3 drops can/should approach typically, right? Like the impact that a good 8 drop will give you on turn 8 or beyond. If it is even approaching close to that, like Watch Post is, but if it is giving you too much, it is actually just breaking the game. So I think too many people, for example, this is more so to do with the caravans than the actual like Watch Post. When they look at a card like Caravan and they're like, dude, Merps, like in the late game, it's giving me like 1 Merps unit. Yeah, it kind of sucks, especially if they have something on the board and they can trade. It's probably only giving you like 1 Merps unit or 2 Merps unit. And in the beginning of the game, God, yeah, sometimes it only gives me 5 Merps units, and that's not super common as well. That's problematic. So we're agreeing on the same thing. Like rarely it does give you 5 Merps units. And what I'm saying is, for the health of the game, for the design of the game, 2 drops shouldn't give you 5 Merps units. And if you're saying, well, wait, that's still not as much as Proto Drake that's dropped on turn 8. Yeah, I would agree with that as well, somewhat, right? Like, but we're going beyond what you should be able to get, because 2 drops on a healthy basis should only give you, let's say, like 2 Merps units or maybe 3 Merps units total. And the fact that you are okay with a 2 drop sometimes giving you, remember 2 drop, 5 Merps units, and you being like, well, it doesn't happen that often, that's still not good for the game. So we've gone through all of this like addition and talking about all of this stuff.
Okay, so mathematically, what Merps is saying is basically that if, let's say, a 2 drop swings it by 4 mana, then it's double the mana, and it would be the equivalent swing of a 8 mana card swinging it by 8 mana. Now, doesn't fully work that way. The 2 drop can swing more than the 8 drop, because as you go later in the game, the effect of the 8 drop stays the same and the effect of the 2 drop stays the same. So you're not just only able to play 2 drops on turn 2 and only able to play 8 drops on turn 8, but it's some number in the middle of the two. In the middle of your raw measurement of
this is why I didn't want to
played.
Bring up numbers.
Yeah,
right.
And it's a number in between when Merps units are when the card is played, how many Merps unit you get, and how many Merps units you get when you play the card relative to how much available total mana there is. So that's all it is. So if you're looking at what is this example, like a 2 mana card, a 2 mana card that gives you 5 mana's worth of stuff versus a 8 mana card that gives you 10 mana's worth of stuff, which is better? It's not. Like it gets worse when you put numbers in it because it's not linear. So
it's not linear.
So it's really hard to actually tell you the value of it. But the idea is it's some number between that, right? It's not one or the other. So we're not saying like it's just 5 divided by 2 versus 10 divided by 8. That's your power levels. That's not your power levels.
Right.
The 2 drop's not that good. But it's also not just 5 versus 10.
Right. So a lot of people tend to have this internal idea where it is just like, okay, look, the 2-drop sucks in the late game, and that's true. And earlier, even in its best scenario, it doesn't equal this really good card when dropped on turn 8. And we're in agreement there. Like everything is in agreement. Now, the disagreement can come from whether or not it is okay for that 2-drop or that 3-drop to ever approach that impact
Mm-hmm.
that 8-drop comes out. Some people might say yes, right? Like, but if you're saying yes, number one, you have to acknowledge that is exactly what you are doing, first of all, because I think a lot of people don't acknowledge that. And number two, actually, there's not really enough. Like, you just
Number
have to
two,
realize
that's terrible for the game, and
that's
you're
terrible.
wrong,
That's
and
actually
you're
terrible.
terrible at
Right.
game design.
Yeah. So I mentioned this, and we can talk about Caravan specifically because it's one of those cards in which I played. Like, I'm trying to like always draft Caravans. Number one, we think they're pretty decent, and number two, I'm always trying to take stock of what it can do. Um, and
Soldier's Caravan is ridiculous. Like
I mean,
we may have underrated it.
the Hunter's Caravan, yeah.
No,
I
no,
mean,
no,
the Hunter's
not
Caravan.
the Soldier's Caravan.
Oh yeah, I Soldier's Caravan is really good.
Like we rated it at A, which is the equivalent of Twin Tyrant. I think it's probably better.
I think it's really good. And remember, it is comparing it to, we're using these Merps units kind of things. I actually want to bring up an example that I saw on Dreads' channel, and I know that I meme on Dreads a lot. But this one I felt was actually very interesting from a psychology standpoint, and really ties into what I was talking about with these Merps units and everything. So Dreads coined out Soldier's Caravan on turn 1, I believe. He proceeded to get 4/1/1s out of it. And his response afterwards, and he might be like half joking, but I don't think he was like, if he was half joking, he wasn't like fully joking about this. He was like, I don't know. He's like, I'm not sure. He was like, this was like the best scenario. And he was like, it was like, okay. He went to win the game, by the way. And he was asking Chad, is
Yeah,
like,
just two
what do you guys
mana,
think?
1/3,
Everything.
1/1, 1/1, 1/1, 1/1.
Right.
2 mana,
Um,
1/2.
Right, which is kind of doubly what you are supposed to get. And yes, in the best instance, it quote only gave you that much. It doesn't guarantee you the win. Watch Post doesn't guarantee you the win. Nothing in the game should literally guarantee you the win, especially when played early on, right? And in the late game, they should disproportionately impact it and push that up. Like Deathwing, quote, guarantees you the win more, but you have done more to survive to play Deathwing in the first place. So skill expression, blah 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 blah. But it's one of those things where because I saw that, I was just like, okay, if and Dreads, if you're seeing this and if you were completely joking, then my bad. But also, you're terrible at telling jokes.
Well, we all
But
knew that.
yeah, we did all know that. But it was one of those things where I was like, I think some people do think of it in this way, where no, it didn't automatically win you the game. In the same feeling that sometimes dropping a Proto Drake on 8 does, right? Where it's like, I'm going to only have this locked down. Like I have locked down the game now, but mostly because they were already in a bad spot, and then you put it down, and that was like the nail in the coffin. But I think Dreads being the good player that he is, and sort of still thinking that way, I'm like, a lot of people probably think that way as well, where, yeah, it was good. It doesn't guarantee me the win, number one. And number two, it's just like, well, that the impact still doesn't feel as big as other cards later on, in which case, yes, we are 100% on the same page then. Like that's totally, that's great. But if we're going to be in a universe in which some people think that 2 mana to get a 1/3 and 4/1/1s is okay, I don't think that's good. And I will concede that, for example, a Soldier's Caravan won't get that super often, but it gets it in a non-negligible enough number. And I'm not even saying it's like,
it gets
like
it super often.
it gets it like, often
Like
enough.
if you can play it on 2,
Yeah.
it gets it super often. Now,
Yeah.
it doesn't get there anywhere near as often if you can't play it on 2. But if you have it on 2, Soldier's Caravan, getting it to live 2 turns is really not that hard.
Yeah.
Like
So,
that's a much more than majority scenario of it happening.
and here's the thing, like, what a lot of people have complained about in terms of not having fun, kind of, oh man, arena is just not what it used to be, and all of this stuff. Part of the reason comes from cards while being played, and a lot of cards while being played, having a sometimes disproportionately high impact for their cost for that turn. Like, they're outputting more Merps units than a quote healthy game should. And it's not exactly about the frequency. Now, if it happens like only 0.1% of the time, then yeah, it might as well not. Like if Coil Fang in the previous it might as well have not existed,
Yeah,
right? So
that's
like
the
whatever.
same as if, for example, you play a Mad Bomber and the 3 hits go perfectly, right?
Mhm.
Like that's just always part of the game. That's just RNG, right? And so if you're gonna break it down and say, okay, we're gonna have a card that's not RNG, but it's only going to appear this tiny percent chance, then when it comes to the experience of facing that card, you just view it as RNG. I happen to face the deck with the 2 mana card that destroys me. Well, I'm only going to see this once every 10,000 matches I play, or 1,000 match I play, or whatever. And I'm kind of okay with it, right? And there's like a dozen of these, floating around. So, like, every 600 matches that I play, I'm going to lose one to one game to this. Like, no one cares about that. No one feels super terrible about that. We're playing a game of chance because Mad Bomber will do that to you, like, at a higher percent chance than that.
Yeah. Um, and once again, uh, this isn't meant to kind of be just a critique of Dreads here because I brought him up a few times. I just watch his streams a lot, which probably
I
reflects
think a
more
lot of
on
people
me
think
than
this
on
way.
him.
I think you bring up
But
dreads
yeah,
because it's not just a lot of people; it's also a lot of very good players. I mean, maybe not a
mhm.
lot of very good players, but quite a
Some good
significant
players.
number of very good players also think in these kinds of ways. Now, okay, I mean, ultimately, like a 3 drop shouldn't have that high of a win percentage. Just
Yeah.
but
Well,
when
so
you're
right
looking
now,
at an in deck win percentage, it'll kind of even out because that kind of builds in like in deck win percentage will build in all the negatives that you can't play Proto Drake for 8 turns for 7 turns. Um, but if you're looking at like how you feel when you play it or how much value you got out of it, you're probably not evaluating it exactly the same way. But no, Soldier's Caravan is straight up busted. Like it's probably not S tier. The impact is really like not there even for a 2 drop, and that's good. But it's definitely like one of the top paladin cards to exist.
yeah, it's quite good. And I think this is necessary to just get into a discussion of what should we tolerate in terms of design, because I think a lot of people are like very very okay with it because it is more about the average. Which, here's the thing, like, first of all, we're going to disagree on the average because I think on average it is better than other people's quote what they think is the average goodness. So we're still going to disagree with it there. But I think a lot of people are also just okay with, if on average it is okay, quote unquote, I'm willing to accept these outliers for these small cards, which we shouldn't. You should be able to or we should be able to tolerate it with larger cards. So something like a box of Yogg Saron, even though it was quite consistent, actually, like it, which is part of the reason it's so good.
Yeah,
But
that's
you
why we
should be
rated
able
that
to.
card like a 180,
I,
like right off the
yeah, I
bat, and
know.
everybody else was like, well, initially everybody else was like, no, this card is terrible. It's too
Initially,
RNG. It's the worst
um,
kind of RNG in Arena. This is like not going to be as good. It's going to be like an okay card at best. And we're like, nope, it's busted. We hate RNG.
but
We rate every other RNG card terribly, but this one's amazing.
I think a lot of people use this idea of like, okay, cards, for example, if you dropping Proto Drake on turn 8 is 10 Merps units, um, they kind of universally just use that and be like, okay, that's, like we're okay with this. Like, no one's calling for Proto Drake to leave the game.
Yeah.
Like, no one's serious, right? So if a 2-drop doesn't even like, come super close to it, that should be okay. And even that is just sometimes. Um, if you're looking within yourself and you understand all of these concepts and you're saying that's okay, then at least you understand it, but your game design is wrong. Like that's wrong
And
because
that's also
that
not
can't happen.
Blizzard's game design.
Yeah,
Like, by the way. Um, just kind of no games game design, because those
yeah,
games are not fun for people, even me people. So when you're alienating both me people and people, you're covering a pretty large spread of that. Okay, so Watchtower, kind of waiting for that. Demon Hunter should be adjusted down, hopefully soon. Like, just push the button. What I want to end on is a pretty positive note, I think, which is that I don't know if I really enjoy the meta, but I definitely enjoy the meta. Despite the fact that it is significantly less stable than most metas before it. They've definitely upped this instability, and the instability is not just because of core card or whatever. They increased the percentage of legendaries, or the pool has changed in a way, right? The neutral pool has changed in a way where legendaries, neutral legendaries, and stuff are just offered like more often, and they didn't actually change how they programmed anything. That could be true too. We're just saying, like, in total, you see more legendaries in the arena, and that is responsible for probably about as much of the imbalance and the huge swings in the arena as the new core set and the new set being like just kind of straight up powerful is responsible for it. So it is very swingy. But what I like about the meta is that everybody, no matter how you draft, no matter what kind of archetype you're going for, can get a curve. And that's something that really actually allows you to express yourself through drafting a little bit. Whereas before, you're kind of just like doing a math equation in your head of like how to get your curve, and especially in some of the metas that happened after the bucket system went away. In, I would say, most of those metas, even if you took every single like X drop, you would not end up with a good curve. Like, so even if you wanted to have a good curve, you could not have a good curve. Here, you're in the opposite situation, which I think is a much better kind of game design. I mean, I'm sure they did not intend for it at all, because they don't do any of this stuff for Arena. It's all constructed design. But in the Arena now, you can draft whatever deck you want and still get a curve. So that means you are always playing the game. You're playing the game on turn 2, you're playing the game on turn 3, you're probably playing the game on turn 1, no matter what else you're doing. And within that, you can decide to, for example, on turn 4, play 2 cards instead of 1, and on turn 5, play 2 cards instead of 1, or you could drop a 4-drop and a 5-drop. You can decide to, put more utility, reach, tempo cards, more 1-mana cards in your deck. You can decide to put more 8 and 9-mana cards in your deck, up to a certain limit based on what you're being offered. But you can do all that without the penalty of potentially not having a deck that is capable of playing the game. You will always have a deck that is capable of playing the game. So this is this is the only meta where I feel like I'm not forced to go control with any particular class, but where I can go control. Because almost always, when a class is good at control, they have to go control. There's no other, like, you can't play like a normal mid-range game with a class that is good at control, because the control win rates are going to overpower the other win rates. So this meta, I think when it comes to, like, mid-range is bad. Like, mid-range is straight up bad. It's, you have to go fast or you have to go slow. And my argument is that it's less stable to go fast than it is to go slow. But everything else you can kind of do. And that's pretty refreshing to me. In terms of how they did that balance, like on the technical side, what they did is they increase. So if you think about the old design, and like a croc is like a 2/3, and that's what 2-drops do. Now what 2-drops do is like a 2-mana 2/2 that draws you a card. That's the new standard for what 2-drops do. Same with 3-drops, same with 4-drops. So if you want that extra stat, you're paying for it a little. If you want 2 extra stats, you're paying for it a little, right? And it goes up and it goes up and it goes up. Now, that doesn't really matter if everyone's playing on curve cards because they'll just kind of match up to each other. But it starts mattering a lot once you're playing 2 cards on one turn. Because now the bonus each card gets is the equivalent of an extra draw card minus a stat, which is something along the lines, like it's a lot more value. Let's just say it's a lot more percentage of the value of your normal curve than you had before. So if you play 2 2-drops on turn 4, or on turn 5 you play a 3-drop and a 2-drop, or a 4-drop and a 1-drop instead of your actual 5-drop, you are actually getting a lot more value than you used to before, and that allows the diversity to kind of be created without combos. That's just natural value that all cards get, and that's also why swings can be really big. Because if your opponent played 5 cards in one turn for like whatever freaking like way that they manage to do so, which they can do nowadays, well, they're getting a lot of that bonus value. That's just for like being a card, right? And like converting that into some kind of value. That was, I think, the core of what the core set did. Is it tried its best to normalize all things along that valuation, and either buffed cards close to that valuation or it destroyed them altogether. So now we have this consistent floor of something similar to that. And like having that consistency in the draft really allows you to do a lot of work in the draft. And I'm really interested in what Blizzard does it for the rest of the year and like where the meta is going to go from here. But this very first meta, this is it's a very good sign. Like this is a very good first meta for the core set. They still have to push the button, but like after they push the button, I think it's just going to be a good meta. Whether Watch Post is in the game or not, like I said, I think Watch Post has a relatively small effect on the game because it's not offered a lot and it's not seen a lot for what it should be, like for its power and for its rarity and for its neutralness. So like even if they ultimately for some weird reason decide that Watch Post is going to remain in the game and just like lowered its offering rate by half or something like they did with Flame Strike before, the meta is going to be good after they push the button. They just need to push the button.
Yeah. I think another way to think about something like this is imagine that there was just this card. Like, let's say it's like a 3-mana 3/4, right? And as long as it's in your deck, it's just a 3-mana 3/4. It doesn't have any other ability, but it has this ability. If this is if this is in your deck, like at the beginning of every turn, basically just pick, like it randomly picks a number from 1 through 100, and if it lands on 100, you flip a coin. Whoever gets heads wins. Like it's one of those things which people. It's like if I told you, okay, so out of 100 games that this is even in your deck, you just end up flipping coin at the very beginning to determine who wins and loses. How would you feel about that? It really doesn't. Like first you have to draft the card, and then only one out of 100 times does it actually do something. I think a lot of people will be like, "Well, that sucks." It's like, wait, what? Like I don't really get to play the game, and it's just like, yeah, like this thing is always looming, and like that's icky. A lot of cards are that, but much more. But you just don't have this sort of like, oh, it pops up at the very beginning and then the number shows up and it's not 100. So you just play normally. Meanwhile, like when the 100 shows up, you're like, oh, that was gross. Yuck. And the fact that you, like, if this were advertised and if this card were out there, you'd be like, oh, that is just not good for the game. Yeah, I would agree with you. There's cards out there that are that plus a lot more. You can dress it up. You can say that like, oh, you could do this. Not really, right? Not really. We're not far from that card, and it's not 1%. It's much higher than 1%.
I was about to say we're beyond that card. And
well, I use the 1% to just say, how would you feel about that, right?
Yeah.
And I think some people would be like, oh, yuck. Like, I don't want that 1% to happen where literally there's no skill involved. And we're past that, right? So number one, you have to draft
we're
that
past
card
5% right now.
Yeah.
Like we're like edging in on 10%, maybe even on 15%.
Yeah. So that's where we are. People want to have control. They don't like this feeling of like stuff, this hypothetical 3 mana 3/4 that only affects a fraction of 1%, right? But if you know that the fraction of 1% is out there, I think a lot of people will be like, dude, this card is dumb. And yeah, it is very dumb. And what we're doing is really addressing some cards in the game that is, putting like a nice, like, smattering of makeup on it, dressing it up, framing it in different ways, doing the Instagram filters, whatever, to blind you from the fact that it's basically that. And the percentage is much higher. And yeah, maybe you have a little bit more control, but effective control, no, you don't have that.
Yeah. Like, instead of calling it like 100% win or 100% lose, 95% win, 5% lose, right? Like, then this has just been, and it's been in the game for, since the very beginning. It's just the percentage keeps creeping higher. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good rundown of the meta, kind of generally, and some things to think about when you're interpreting this meta and what's happening. We're in a new world now. I think if you just jump in the arena, you'll feel differently than if you had played at any other time in the arena. And depending on what time you played in the arena, this is either better or it could potentially be worse. But I think it definitely has potential, and it is nowhere as bad as it could have been. And the biggest problem, I think there's two biggest problems, but one of the biggest problems is so easily fixed and guaranteed that Blizzard will fix it, which is Demon Hunter. And the other problem, which is legendaries, is also super easy to fix, but I don't think Blizzard's going to fix it. I have much less faith that Blizzard wants to do it. Not because it's hard, but because they think people have fun when they play Ysera and just win, right? Like, Blizzard sitting there and looking at you and being like, so you're saying, like, 10, maybe 12% of the time, it doesn't matter what the skill is, and then the worst player just, like, wins no matter what? That's pretty good game design, they'll say. Because there's a lot of people who play who want to win and who are not good. And they want to beat people who are better than them. Like, that's part of the reason why people play this game. And to have it be a 10%, 12%, not like, 30% or 40%, right? Even if it was like 50% or 60%, you still have a game. Like a competitive game. It just gets worse and worse. And like, that's what we call like skill impact, right? Except what Merps is specifically talking about is skill impact, but one card ruins the entire game for the skill impact. Like, the skill impact of the game has always been relatively low, right? Like, top arena players get like 8 wins, and the average, like, I don't know, so a little under 3 losses and average 8 wins. So the normal skill impact is that compared to 50-50, skill impact is double. That's how the math works out. So your skill impact is double, meaning that if you are the better player, you will win the game 75% of the time. And that's literally an assumption that we built into the Lightforge algorithm. Like, that has underlined the Lightforge algorithm the entire lifetime that that tier list existed. Is that a perfect or near perfect player will have a 75% win rate in this game. And we've never changed that because that's how it always is. But now it's being shifted more by single particular cards. And I would argue that what that means, because that win percent is still relatively stable, is that the rest of the game, outside of these cards that are getting super problematic, is actually getting better and more balanced. So every other aspect of the game in Arena is improving, and quite dramatically compared to like back in the day. But these like individual outliers that add up to make up for that 10 or 12% of the game is having this huge impact. And those are the cards that existed literally like 1 or 2% in Classic and are now like 10 or 12%. So whatever progress was made on the balance side with all this, like, oh, all the cards are kind of even, more even, and whatever, where generally you have more ability to like flip the board around, so you're not just getting snowballed to death all the time. Like, all the improvements was made there, it's being undone, and then some by that 10 to 12%.
Yeah, but look, ADWCTA was talking about some positives. I've had a good time just learning the meta, because it is completely different. If you haven't played yet and you liked Arena in the past, or if you're just curious to check it out, I would encourage you guys to at least check it out. You might get frustrated a little bit by Demon Hunters, but we have a completely new core set. It has been interesting just to kind of see new cards, play with them. It is just a shame that the watch posts, which you don't see too often, so
and
it's
just
not going
more
to
RAM watch
completely ruin
posts.
every single run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't want to come back to the arena right now, and right now is actually still pretty fine. It's not the best, but it's pretty fine. Like, just wait until they do any micro adjust patch, and then it'll be good. It will actually be good because they can't mess that up. At least they can't mess that up too bad. They've been doing it for 5 years now. Okay. Any other final words?
No, I think that's it. So we've talked a lot about watch posts. We've talked a lot about the meta, and I think the most important thing is when we're having a discussion about watch posts, about what is fun, and if we talk about the impact a card should have, um, it's a discussion we've had for a while now. But I'm hoping that people are able to look within themselves, and if we are disagreeing about these, the scenario where I'm using Merps units or whatever, I want to at least be engaging you in a situation where you are saying, yes, I understand this entire analogy. I do think it is okay sometimes for these 2-drops to output, let's say, 6-7 Merps units. And it's because I think this Proto Drake, which outputs like 10 Merps units, that is okay-ish, and that should be sort of the line. If you understand it, and if you like, our disagreement is there, whereas I think 2-drops should never output that much Merps units, even at a low frequency, because that's unhealthy for the game. At least we're talking the same language here. I think, though, on a very fundamental basis, just watching streams, watching very good players sort of analyze this, people aren't internalizing that. And whether or not it would change their minds, we have to all acknowledge that and say, okay, this is what I'm okay with. This is what I'm not okay with. And then that's fine. If you still disagree there, then we disagree on a game design basis, which is fine. Game designers and players disagree with each other all the time. But I need people to understand this and be able to internalize that. Otherwise, I think we're going to have this conversation more and more because of how Blizzard is outputting cards. And if we keep sort of talking past each other, it's just not going to be productive. So today it's the watch post. Tomorrow it's
a 1-mana card.
I don't know. Uther's pretty pink pony. And the pony is just outputting like 10 Merps units on turn 3, and people are like, yeah, go pony. Like, it's not that toxic. It's only stomping people and producing a 4/4 like 5% of the time. That's fine. At least in that way, we can actually engage the pony discussion in a productive way.
All right. That's it for this week. We'll see you guys next week on the Lightforge podcast. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merp. See you guys.
See ya.